we get started ultrasounding a couple of mares, we're going to kind of go through all the individual pieces and talk about what they do and how we use those before we get the live mare in here. So here we have our ultrasound machine. You can kind of see the screen here. And then what's going to help us get the picture on the ultrasound is our ultrasound probe. This is a 5 megahertz transrectal ultrasound probe. So we have the end of the probe here and then the cord that attaches it to the machine where it'll read once we get this probe into the mare. So here, if I turn it sideways, you can kind of see the face of the probe here. And inside this probe, there are crystals that vibrate and produce sound waves that it then sends into the tissue and then reads feedback based on density and those sort of things of the tissue that it's kind of reading through. So it also needs something to go through. So if I hold my hand up here, you can't see anything on the screen. If I hold my hand to the probe, you can't really see anything on the screen. I'm not going to do this, but if I were to put some lube, we have here our OB lube, into my hand and put this probe on it, you would be able to see something on the screen here. So it needs something to transmit through. So those crystals vibrate around in there, send sound, and then we're going to get a picture back in real time here on our ultrasound machine. We'll kind of go through it a little more as we have an actual live picture on the machine, but the more dense the tissue, the brighter white it's going to be on our ultrasound machine. So when we think of what's going to be the densest tissue we can see inside the mare, probably going to be bone, right? So bone will show up on here as very bright white. The opposite end of the spectrum would be the least dense tissue we're going to go through, which is probably going to be follicular fluid or blood vessels, that sort of thing. That will show up black on our ultrasound machine. And then the individual variants in between, we'll see all shades of gray between bright white and solid black here on our machine. Once we get a mare in here, we'll kind of go through the process of how we get her ready to palpate. But again, the important components here are our ultrasound machine. Also, these crystals are very sensitive and break easily, so we want to protect the tip of this probe here and not let it, whack up against the metal stalks or whatever and break those crystals that are in there. So it's very important, and we take good care kind of the end of our probe here to prevent that from happening. So we talked about we have our OB lube here. Want to make sure that we lubricate everything well, make this comfortable for the mare. In grad school, I always had a professor who would tell me gloves are optional, lube is not. Here we use both, but lube is a very important component of that, particularly for mare comfort and that sort of thing. And then we have our palpation sleeve that goes all the way up to our shoulder here. As you'll see kind of as we get inside the mare, some older mares with pendulous uteruses or whatever big-bodied soggy mares, their ovaries are really far in there, so we're going to have to be past our elbow into that mare, so we want to make sure we have gloves that kind of cover our whole arm here. These are very sensitive, thin gloves. We want to make sure that we don't scratch the mare or cause any sort of discomfort, with our gloves that we use. The seam here is barely palpable on these. Some of the older style gloves will have a little bit rougher seam. If we use those here, we tend to turn those inside out. Horses' rectums are pretty friable. They're easy to irritate. So we want to make sure that we don't do any of that and keep all of the gloves that we use. Hopefully we're not going to have any problems with that. The seams are very superficial and the gloves are very thin. So now we have our mare in the stocks here, and we've already kind of prepared her from her tail standpoint to go ahead and ultrasound her. Typically, we don't usually tie tails up out here at the horse unit, but for the sake of being able to see everything and get everything done, we did today. It keeps all of the tail hairs out of the way. That's something very important. When we do go in rectally here, we don't want to take any of those tail hairs with us that might irritate some of that rectum. So tying this up gets everything out of the way here, so we don't have to worry about that. So all we have is some gauze wrapped around her tail that's then kind of pulled up around her neck that kind of takes her tail to the side and keeps that out of the way and keeps everything a little bit cleaner. So here you can see the external anatomy of this mare. Top hole here is the rectum, so that's the end of her digestive tract. And then here underneath her rectum is her vulva, which is the external portion of her reproductive tract. When we ultrasound these mares, we are interested in what is going on inside the reproductive tract. However, we palpate them rectally. So we're going to kind of get everything ready to go, and then we're going to have to remove all of the feces from the caudal portion of her rectum here to be able to get in there with the ultrasound probe and see everything that's kind of lying underneath. So the rectum kind of just sits right on top of that uterus. So we go in rectally, the ultrasound probe reads down, and we see, what's going on underneath there. So I'm going to go ahead and get a glove on and get ready to remove all of the feces out of her rectum so we can get her ultrasounded. Also, you'll notice I'm putting this glove on my right hand. I am left-handed. I palpate with my other hand. Most people do palpate with their non-dominant hand because that leaves your writing hand free to write stuff down and also to manipulate other things. So I can do things with my dominant hand while I'm palpating with my non-dominant hand. As we mentioned, lube, very important. We want to kind of get lube on our rectum here to facilitate inserting our arm. We kind of let her get used to it a little bit. I go in just enough to get me a handful. And we remove the poop balls. Now that we have all of the manure removed from the caudal portion here, I basically take as much manure as I can get as far in as I can reach. That kind of clears everything out to give me enough room to work when I go in with the probe. Before I grab the ultrasound probe, I usually go in and manually palpate just with my hand to kind of get an idea of where everything is. So I'll reach in. I usually find the portion of her uterus here, kind of at the body. Follow one horn up, find where that ovary is, follow that horn up, find where the other ovary is, so I have a little better idea of what we're working with when we go in with the ultrasound probe. Next, so once I've done that, I take the probe here, again, get me lots of lube again. Same procedure as when we went in before. And then I generally find a starting point. Sometimes the bladder is really full, and that's something that we can find first off. Her bladder must not be super full because I don't see a bladder yet. But I generally want to start at uterus. So here is kind of the body of her uterus here. And again, this picture is kind of hard to distinguish unless you've looked at a whole lot of them. I'm trying to find, I can't get her hip bone in there. So I can change the depth, how far down that ultrasound will read. So you can see here we have brighter white pieces on the ultrasound here. That's reflecting back off tissue that's very dense, so probably bone. And then we can search around for, trying to find a blood vessel here. Well, we found an ovary. So anything that comes back as darker is going to be less dense, so fluid filled. So we have an ovary here with a very tiny follicle on it. So as we are a little bit further north than our friends to the south in Texas, the likelihood of us finding mares cycling now is a lot lower. So I would say the majority of our mares at this point are going to be transitional, which means transitioning from winter anestrus to seasonal cyclicity going into the spring as the days get longer. I don't know if you can see the picture here. I pulled up a Very small ovary, unusual that you can fit an entire ovary on the screen, but again, we're transitional, don't have lots of active follicles. It's a little bit easier to fit the whole thing. It's a little bit blurry because I kind of focused on the follicle, but you can see the entire ovary here, and then kind of right here in the middle is a very round, approximately 10 to 12 millimeter follicle on her ovary. That's pretty small. I'm assuming in the later parts you guys will kind of talk a little bit more about a breedable size follicle. This wouldn't even be on my radar. We would put smalls in our book and go on and find the next ovary. But that is a very small fluid-filled follicle on that right ovary. And I'm left-handed. I usually find the right one first and then go up and find the left one. I'm going to pull this poop ball out. Okay. So I froze the screen here. I was assuming this mare was in estrus. Well, it's a bad assumption to make in February because sometimes they tease during transition with nothing. But I've seen her teasing approximately 3 weeks ago and saw her teasing again today. So I was reasonably hopeful that she was actually going to be in estrus today. And this here is a cross-sectional slice of her uterus, which has a lot of edema in it. A lot of people will characterize it as a wagon wheel or an orange slice. You can see all of the endometrial folds here as it's filled up with that edema. This is a pretty good indication to us that she has a large breedable follicle on one of her ovaries. But that's a pretty classic picture of that uterine edema prior to ovulation. And as you see, I kind of sweep through it. It fills up the whole uterus. There's her body. Oh, fine. She doesn't want to stand still. So this is her right ovary. And I'll freeze that there. I'm assuming this is the follicle that's giving her all of that edema. We can measure it here with our ultrasound. And it measures 40 millimeters. So if I were going to breed this horse, which I'm considering doing, I would feel comfortable on inseminating her now. Typically, we look for that 35 millimeter follicle to go ahead and make that call to breed. I'm more than likely going to be breeding this mare with frozen semen, so it looks like I get to come out here tonight and ultrasound this mare again. So I follow, it's a lot easier to follow these uteruses, uteri, what's the plural? When it has all of that edema, you can see the bifurcation there where the two horns come together. It's a little more distinctive. So we follow it way up to the tip. Can you get her to step back just a little bit? I need a little further in there. Perfect. So there is her left ovary. Smaller, some activity. You can see individual little follicles. Her ovary is wrapped up in the broad ligament, so I'm not getting great connection there. That's why you kind of see that black line, but that's her left ovary there. You can follow it right back to the tip of that uterine horn. Follow the horn all the way down to the bifurcation where they come together in the body. That's more in the body of her uterus, back towards her cervix. And you can follow it all the way up to the ovary with the pre-ovulatory follicle on it.